as I traveled the world, as I went to all these different places and eventually started a community which grew to a lot of different people doing really interesting things, I found all kinds of other people who were also undertaking quests. And I met them at different events and meetups and just while I was out in the world. And some of them would write into me. And I heard of people doing lots of other travel quests. There are a number of people who were walking across entire countries, like walking across America or walking across Turkey. There was a family I heard from who cycled their bikes from Alaska to Argentina over about 5 months. There was a young sailor from the Netherlands who actually became the youngest person ever in the world at age 16 to circumnavigate the globe in a sailboat. And while she was doing that, she was essentially running from her own government who was trying to track her down and bring her back. But she successfully did that. And in addition to the travel quests, I heard from people undertaking other quests as well. I heard from a guy who was seeking to live without money for 5 years and just kind of explore community in that way. I heard from someone in Australia who wanted to produce the largest symphony of all time that required more than 800 performers. And it was something that took him more than 20 years to kind of put it all together. I heard from a woman who liked the idea of going to every country, but wasn't able to because she had a young child. And so instead of going to every country, she made a meal from every country in the world. And this was her attempt to kind of integrate her family into global culture and to raise her daughter with more of an international awareness. And lots of other different kinds of quests. And I was really interested in understanding, why do other people pursue quests? And what do they learn, from that? And what do they sacrifice to pursue a quest or a big adventure? And do all of these different people have something in common? Even though they're doing very different projects, do they have things in common? And what I found was a lot of them were also list people. They very much like to make lists. They like to check things off. They liked the notion of incremental progress, of being able to say, here is the goal, but there's a number of goals and milestones along the way. They enjoyed that. There was often a defining moment that led to the beginning of their quest or project. There was sometimes something that they had lost or almost lost. Sometimes there was a hardship. Sometimes they had lost their job, but otherwise it wasn't always so serious. Sometimes there was just something that kind of inspired or triggered them to say, I need to do this. But the other thing that was really quite common among all these different people is when they began their quest or before they began, they were somewhat discontented or they were somewhat dissatisfied. And when I use those words, I don't mean that they were all terribly unhappy. I don't mean that they were all miserable or depressed. Some of them might have been, but others had good lives. They had good jobs or good work. They might have had healthy relationships, but yet they felt that there was something missing in their life. They felt, strangely unsatisfied. They felt like, there's something that I really want to do, and if I don't do this, just as I felt, they felt like they would really regret it. And so the language that they used when I talked with them was very similar to the language that I used when I first began. They said things like, I have this crazy idea. I just have to do it. I don't know entirely why. I just know that if I don't, I'll look back and I'll wish that I had. As we began our time together yesterday, Greg Hartle said something that I really liked. I wrote it down. I just want to make sure I get it right. He posed this question to all of us. He said, what kind of world do we want to live in? And what are we building to contribute to that world? So a lot of the people that undertake quests, something else they have in common, they have an emotional awareness of mortality. Not just an intellectual awareness, but an emotional one. So an intellectual awareness of mortality is just to kind of understand the fact that everyone eventually dies. An emotional awareness of mortality is more personal. It's to recognize the fact, someday I will die. Someday each of us will in fact die. And a lot of them lived with that moment of presence. There was one woman who set out to see as many birds as possible, as many different bird species all over the world. And she had actually received a terminal diagnosis of cancer. And when she received that diagnosis at a young age, her first thought was, oh no, there's so many things in my life that I haven't done. There are so many things left undone. And fortunately, in her case, the diagnosis was premature, and she was actually able to live for 20 more years. And she devoted much of the next 20 years to fulfilling this quest, to see more birds than anyone else had ever done before. Now, personally, I'm not very passionate about birds, but I know not everyone is passionate about visiting every country in the world, or whatever it is. However, I don't think that merely being aware of mortality is sufficient to inspire a lot of change in our lives. I think it's a good start. But I think the true tragedy of life is not that it could end at any moment, but the true tragedy is that it could just kind of keep going with no change, with no progress, with no improvement. And if we find ourselves in that moment of being discontented or dissatisfied or wanting something more, if we don't do something about it, it could just kind of keep on going. And that's what a lot of people do, and I've done that at different points in my life as well. When I was growing up, I had two different families. My parents were divorced, and one of the families was pretty religious, kind of religious fundamentalists, and we had to go to a lot of church services, my brother and I. And I remember many of these services were kind of emotional and dramatic, and one of the themes that kept coming up a lot was, would you be willing to die for your faith? And this question was always asked as a means of kind of, soliciting an emotional commitment or soliciting a response. And there was often a story told about being in a different country, somewhere like Russia or China, where religious freedom doesn't exist. And the story would be something like, the believers would be together in the church, and the government or the military or someone would come in, and they would ask you, do you still believe? And if you believe, then we'll kill you. And if you choose to reject your faith, then you can live, So the whole question is, would you be willing, to die for your faith? And as I grew up, I kind of realized, well, it's fine if you believe, if you don't believe, that's your personal choice. But that question, what are you willing to die for, is really quite limiting. Because in many ways it's irrelevant. It's not a question that most of us get to answer. Almost none of us get to choose, how we're going to die. We don't die for a cause. We don't die for a person. Most of us die eventually from an illness or from an accident. It just happens. We don't have any control over that. But however, there's another question that's far more interesting. And this is a question that each of us can answer in our own way, regardless of what we believe about anything else. And each of us can answer this question every day. And that question is, what's worth living for? What is worth investing in? What's worth, choosing to spend our time and choosing to spend our focus? And what kind of world do we want to live in? And how are we contributing to that world? That's something that is available to all of us. And as I said, it's a daily investment. It's a daily choice. So over the past 2 to 3 days, we've all been learning together. I've been enjoying learning from many of you and learning from the speakers. It's been great. And now we're all preparing soon to travel, to go back home, wherever home is, tonight, tomorrow, maybe the next day. And so just as we think, what kind of world do we want to live in, I think it's also good to think, okay, what's next? What are we doing next? So obviously next we're all going to register for Alive in Berlin 2015. That offer is still available, right, Jana? That's great. But then, after that, that won't take you very long, What are we going to do? And I mentioned that a lot of these people who pursued a quest or an adventure are inspired initially by discontent, by dissatisfaction. But just as the awareness of mortality is not sufficient on its own, I think that discontent also is not sufficient, because there are plenty of unhappy people around the world who don't change. There are plenty of unhappy people who want something different but aren't able to make that choice or aren't able to do something. And so I really think that this frustration somehow has to merge with something practical. It has to merge with a vision. It has to merge with a plan of action. You know, we have to go away and say, okay, you know, what is that world? What am I doing? You know, what bothers me? What am I doing about that? Do I have that dream? Do I have that crazy idea that I thought of? And if I have that crazy idea, and if one day I know if I don't pursue it, then I'm going to regret it, then what do I hope to do about it? And my hope for all of you, for all of us, myself included, is that we pay attention to those ideas and we follow up on those ideas. And by the way, it may not be easy. It may, in fact, be quite hard. You know, I would never want to suggest that if you choose to live a life of adventure, whatever that means for you, that it's going to be worry-free or stress-free. I think that would be quite boring, right? I really like the story that Pam told yesterday of talking to Jana a long time ago. I forgot how long she said, but maybe a year ago or something, about this event. And Jana was feeling kind of uncertain, and it was hard, and it was kind of stressful, and there was worry involved. And in many ways, the easy choice, the worry-free choice, would have been to say, let's just not do that. Let's do something different. And life is fine just now, so why bother, right? But I'm so glad that that's not the choice she made. I'm so glad she persevered, and that's why we're all here together, right? So it's not necessarily easy, but sometimes the things that are worth doing, you know, require effort. They do require endeavor. So 2 things, and then we'll talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. If you have the crazy idea, don't stop paying attention to it. Don't try to forget about it. Maybe there's something to it, and maybe there isn't, but you should explore it. You should fully explore it before you write it off. And then the last thing is, if there's anyone here, just in case, if there's anyone here who has had a great time and does feel inspired but doesn't really know what to do or doesn't know what that crazy idea is or feels kind of left out because everyone else has this big vision, I think that's okay too. I think that's all right. Sometimes it's a process, right? Sometimes it's something that happens over time. The project of visiting every country, I didn't start from like country number 1 and say, okay, now I'm going to do the next 192. It was something that developed as I loved travel and as I loved goal setting. You know, the conference, an event like this, this is something that develops out of organic community and out of meetups and finding different people. So sometimes it takes time. It's okay. But I don't think you should forget about it. I think you should be intentional about it, and you should do whatever you can to find it, because I think this is some of the most meaningful work that we can do. And as we think about those things, and just as importantly, as we take action toward them, that's what I think it means to be fully alive. Thanks. So I would love to dialogue a bit with you. I think there's a microphone in the back. Do you want to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment? And Jana, are you going to bring?
Sure.
Great. That's great.
Shoot.
My question is that I'm always having trouble like creating something that I think is really cool and remarkable, but that is not necessarily something that people would pay you for. And then there's something like people pay you for, but you think it's kind of like it's like a censored version of what I want to do, right?
Sure.
So it's really hard to find, like, for me sometimes the middle, because I'm on an illustrator, to find exactly the moment where you think this is really awesome and people also want to pay you for that. So how do you find like the convergence point?
Yeah, well, I think you just addressed what I was going to. I mean, this is the central question of self-employment in general, and this is the central question of whether it's self-employment or not, of forging the kind of work that you want to do that is also meaningful and valuable to other people. And again, sometimes it's a process, sometimes it's not just, you know, right away, but I would say you're probably interested in more than one thing. You said you're an illustrator, right? Yeah, what kind of things do you illustrate?
So my website is marsdorian.com, and I do like illustrations for mostly, I work mostly with Americans, right, in the startup social media business, and anything from slideshows and book covers and digital ebook illustrations to mascots and stuff like that.
That's great. What was the website again?
marsdorian.com.
Marsdorian, oh, of course, I know you. That's nice. Sorry, I didn't recognize you for a second. marsdorian.com, you should all read his blog. So maybe, in some cases, it's a matter of saying, okay, I have all these different interests. I don't necessarily have to just pursue one of them. Maybe out of all the different things I'm interested in, there are some things that actually other people are interested in also. Where can I find, that point that I'm not compromising necessarily, that I'm not creating something that's more commercial than I want or whatever. I think it's just a part of experimentation. When I started my blog, for me, it was not a business model at all. There was no advertising, no sponsorship, and I didn't even have a plan, to monetize it in some way. But I just kind of paid attention to the things that people were asking me about, and I noticed that they were all asking like certain things. So this is another thing that helps sometimes, because in my case, people were specifically asking me how I traveled around the world and how I did it without spending a lot of money. And I realized that I could continue doing the work that I love to do for free, but I could also develop some products, as you mentioned earlier. And that's how I found it. But again, it was maybe, I don't know, if it's been 5 years since I started that, I would say it was a year to 2 years before I really, latched onto something. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 questions over here.
Thanks. I remember going 2 or 3 years ago, you justified what you were doing. I think it was, you said I could buy like a 20, 30,000 SUV.
Right.
Or I could, put that same money into traveling. I've had a mental block for quite a while about traveling and money. For me, it's like if you have a tangible thing that you buy, you see it, you can kind of perceive its value. But with traveling, especially with, say, plane tickets and however much you might spend on plane tickets, that money is just, it's gone. You buy the plane ticket, you get on the plane, once you're on the other end, it's gone. Do you have any advice for working out how to find, I know this sounds a bit crazy, but working out to find the value in something as against like a material object?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I don't think anyone has ever framed the question that way before. It's Tom, right? Yeah. Tom. So, Tom was mentioning a post that I did a long time ago about how when I first started traveling, I was trying to figure out how much it would cost to go to every country, and I realized that I could visit the first 100 countries for spending about $30,000. And at the time, I was thinking, like, that's a great deal. That's a great value for me, because it's not like I have $30,000 to just spend right away, but over years, over 4 to 5 years or something, I'm happy to spend that because of the experience that I'm going to receive, in return. So I guess for me, I did choose deliberately to value life experiences more than physical things, personally. And for me, I was happy to give up, the SUV or whatever, the physical possession would be, because I knew how travel made me feel. I knew how going to different places made me feel, and meeting different people, like, I really enjoyed that. So I guess for me, I was happy to do it. But I'm also not an evangelist. I'm not you should not own anything, you should only invest in travel or whatever. I think you should do what's meaningful and valuable to you, so maybe it's a question of doing both somehow, or, really thinking to yourself, okay, what do I want, as we talked about yesterday, what do I want to be, to have, to do, over the next few years, and then letting those decisions kind of guide how you make individual choices, right? If it's something, if you want to travel the world, then you have to somehow trade off something else. If you want to defer that for a while, then that's also okay. I mean, it's your own choice, right?
Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
First and foremost, thanks for being such a huge inspiration, man. How did you tap into like the faith to tackle such an immense project? Like,
gradually.
Cool.
Gradually, very much.
Okay.
Because, as I said, it developed over time. It was not like I knew right from the beginning that this was what I was going to do. And even more so, I would say, that the travel was systematic, and I liked that. Because, as I said, like, I'm really attracted to like knowing exactly what I need to do, and I'll do that, and then I'll do something else. That was very helpful. But everything that happened along the way, in terms of the community, the business, the events, writing books and things, I had no idea in the beginning. So it wasn't that I had to somehow like have this huge level of faith that all this stuff was going to happen. I kind of, I really hate the phrase follow your passion. I never want to encourage people to say that, but I did think about what am I excited about, and that's what I want to do. And as there were stepping stones along the way, then I would kind of embrace that. But it's something that happened gradually.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris. 2 questions.
Well, where we go? Where are we?
Here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
2 questions.
Yes.
The first one is actually a question I talked with Dave yesterday.
Yes.
And this is when you're starting a blog or trying to build an audience, how important is it to have a niche, and what can you do if you have multiple interests? In my case, that would be food and movement. They go together pretty well, but let's say if it's like corporate finance and food, for example. Is it important to have a niche in the beginning, yes or no? And the second question would be, I first heard about the concept of writing 1,000 words a day, either good or bad, just write them and then edit on later on. How would you do that if you have a very visual topic, let's say with cooking, for example? I can't cook dinner in the morning, first thing in the morning, right? So how would you tackle that?
Okay, great questions. What did Dave say about your first question? Because you said you asked him, so...
I said you melt, you ultimately find a way to melt your 2 interests, a really unique offering that draws people in from different...
Okay. Did you guys hear that over here? So Dave said you find a way to meld the different interests. You find a way to, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, to kind of, put them together. And the word that I like to use is not niche or niche. I like to use the word theme. So I actually don't think you need a niche. I don't believe that you have to have something super specific. I know that there are some people who say that, and maybe that's been true for them. That's great. In my case, it certainly wasn't the way that I chose to do it. And partly that was because I was worried I would get bored, if it was something too specific. I had started a lot of projects in the past where I was really motivated and excited for a while, but then it kind of dropped off. And with this one, when I started writing the blog, it was something that I really liked the medium, and I wanted to be able to keep doing it for a long period of time. So I didn't choose a niche, but I did, as Dave kind of referred to, I did meld the interests together, and I chose a theme. And I said, what do all these things have in common? It's more of a worldview, nonconformity, than it is anything super specific. So that's what I think. But I agree with his answer. You had a second question about what if you're not a writer? What if it's something different? Well, I think the 1,000 words a day, it's just a trick. It's just something that helps me to produce, on a regular basis. So if it's something different, if you're a painter, can you paint, 1 painting a day for a year? You've mentioned cooking. Can you try a new recipe, every single day? I think the principle is just instilling the deliverable as opposed to the time commitment. So it doesn't really matter how long it takes you to make the dish or how long it takes you to write the words or whatever it is you're trying to create. Your whole goal is to have an outcome for it, is to have a deliverable. And so for me, I like the deliverable-based mindset. Kind of a long answer, I'm sorry. You had a question here. Can we come here?
So I have a question, like coming back to quests and adventures, and it's more about relationships, because I'm a traveler myself, and I guess a lot of us are. And when you're traveling long term, and especially like, for example, like visiting every country like you, I think like our relationships change a lot. Like when you set off on your trip, I guess your relationships and friends have been quite different to what they are now. So I'm just quite curious how that was personally for you, because I guess we always seek people like-minded people. That's why we're here right now too, and that also means to maybe like just break with some friendships too that we have developed over time, and that sometimes is really hard. So how was that like for you?
Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's been complicated. I think you said it well. I think, you sense that, like you didn't use the word conflict. I don't want to say conflict, but there is sometimes a divide or something between like a life that you have in one way, and then you start doing something totally different, and then you have new relationships and new friendships, and hopefully some of those hopefully, you know, many of those, you know, existing relationships remain strong, but sometimes other ones change. So it is kind of complex. You know, it has been difficult at times for me, but it's also been very good.
All right. Thank you.
Chris, you travel the world. You do tons of events. Oh, by the way, I got 2 questions, but the second one is tiny. I just wonder, did you learn something new here in this weekend? Well, not really weekend, these 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Or have an insight, or I'm just curious.
That's great. I don't know if I have like a short response, you know, to that. I guess when I think about, you know, I talked about why did I travel? Why do I come to things like this? I come to gatherings like this because I find them refreshing. I find it very energizing to talk to people from different cultures who share similar interests, or at least a similar perspective. I think that these, you know, for better or worse, these kinds of gatherings don't happen in Europe as much, and I'm really glad that they are happening now. I think it's been a needed, you know, experience for a long time, and so I guess for me, my motivation was I want to be a part of, you know, this first thing, and I want to, you know, talk to people and connect with people. So I don't know if there's like a one-sentence, you know, thing that I go away with.
No, but
it's just a lot of conversations, I guess, with people.
Yeah, but do you have like an insight that you take with you, like?
Yes, tomorrow when I get on the plane, I'll have the insight. That's good. That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
My second.
Oh, sorry. Second question. Yes.
My second question. I'm sorry. Is my favorite question that I learned here yesterday. Is what would you say that's your superpower?
My superpower is jet lag. I'm always very tired. That's all I have. Sorry.
Okay. Then I'm just gonna give the microphone to somebody else.
There's at least somebody back. Okay.
Okay. Chris, I have still a question.
Hi.
Honored to be your pre-speaker. I'm really interested in inspiration and what gets you up in the morning. What's your motivation?
What gets me up in the morning? I like making things. I really like producing. I like engaging. I feel motivated and inspired when something is happening, when like there is some deliverable. So we talked about the 1,000 words or something. I find that very energizing myself. So I guess if I haven't produced something or made some progress on some project, I start to kind of feel bad. It's like, for those of you who exercise, like if you don't exercise one day or something, it's okay. But if you go like a couple days, like after a while, you start really feeling bad. And so that's what motivates me is making progress on things.
I have a similar thing with your 1,000 words. I created my daily dose of creativity.
There you go. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I think we have the same mindset.
Yeah. Thanks.
First of all, thank you for the talk. I have a question for you. So the world has recently lost a few big leaders, Nelson Mandela and recently also Maya Angelou. I wanted to tell you, ask you, who do you think one of the leaders are of today and what we alivers can learn to be better leaders of the future?
What's up with you guys? What the hell? Can I ask you, do you have an answer for this already? Do you have some, do you have some, who do you see as a leader?
That's a question I ask myself. I honestly think there's a lack of intergenerational exchange between leaders and the leaders of tomorrow. Okay. And that's why I hope that you have the answers.
Yeah, I don't. I'm going to keep thinking about it, but thank you. Can I skip that one? Can I go over here? It's great.
Thanks. Hi. My question is maybe a little off the theme, but in the same time, I think that you are one of the most competent people in the world to answer that. When you are making an art, people are hopefully starting to like your art, but in the same time, during modern communication, people are also starting to follow you as a person. Sure. And I'm going to use the writer analogy. For example, when we are writing fiction, but also you are personally interested in non-fiction, how would you communicate your personal interest, not to push out the people who are only for your art, nor the people who are interested in you and not your art?
Yeah, okay, so there are two ways to do that, and you know, neither way is better necessarily. Some people will essentially have, you know, 2 identities or 2 projects, you know, 2 online hubs or whatever, and kind of put attention on each one. Personally, I generally think it's better to go for a more integrated approach and just to put different kinds of work out and to allow people to engage how they see fit. And I think you might be surprised a little bit with the crossover, because there might be people who actually, because you're a novelist, right? You said you're going to write a novel the other day? Great. So, you know, I read a lot of fiction, and I'm often interested in the author's life. I want to know more about them. So I bet there's a lot more people who would be interested in both than you might think, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. That's good. Are we good? One more question here? Or wherever the microphone is. Here it is.
Hi Chris. Yeah, I'm Chris. And yesterday Pam said that, yeah, when she looks at you, she said, oh, Chris, no, everything goes so well with him. And yeah, when I think we all know, like, when there is a, World Domination Summit, and there is a book, and there is another book, and there is, like, you know, the whole projects which are going really well. Can you tell, like, something a little bit about this, like, tough moments when, because I'm sure that we all got this, and we look at the people and we say, whoa, yeah, they are doing amazing thing. I would like to be like them, but I got so many like problems, and I know that it requires, you know, some time and everything. Like, can you share something with us?
Yeah, no, great. I have a lot of problems and a lot of failures. You know, I have a lot more failures than I have successes. You probably don't hear about the failures. I mean, that's the thing, right? You know, so I just, you know, Leah asked what motivates me. I'm motivated by starting things. I'm not always so good at continuing them, you know? And so, I mean, I would say, like, if you look at the trajectory of what I've done, which is all available online, that's the interesting thing. Like, you can't get rid of it, you know. You'll see a lot of things that didn't go super well. You'll see a lot of things that I hoped would do better than they did. And even the successful things like WDS or the books or something, you know, there's always, like, you know, ways that it could be better or things that didn't go great. So I feel like that's totally normal. So I struggle every day, too. Everyone struggles. You know, there's this expression, you know, I pay someone to put my pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else, you know. Maybe that didn't have that. That's good. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I'm happy to talk. Thank you.